Silence. Only the sound of waves crashing against the ship's wooden hull existed. But that silence was filled with the muted screams of hundreds of souls. In the dark belly of the vessel, among chained bodies pressed together in suffocating heat, sat Kwame. His hands and feet were bound by metal rings. His skin stuck to the cold iron. Beside Kwame was his son, Kofi. The boy was only 8 years old. His eyes no longer cried. The tears had run dry. Kwame stroked his son's hair gently. His fingertips barely touched the child's scalp. He couldn't speak, but he could still sing. At first it was a low hum. Then the sounds began to rise. Kwame's voice emerged from the darkness. The song he sang in his African tongue reached every corner of the hold. Other captives lifted their heads. Some began to weep. Some listened. Some quietly joined the song. On the ship's deck, the white crew heard the singing. One of them laughed and turned to his companion, mocking the sounds coming from below. He dismissed it as meaningless noise, as if nothing would ever change. But Kwame knew. The song was more than melody. The song meant resistance. The song meant remembering. The song meant survival. 3 months later, the ship reached American shores. Kwame and his son Kofi were brought ashore with hundreds of other captives. They were in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The air was hot, humid, suffocating. Kwame's feet touched American soil for the first time. But this land meant nothing to him. It was just a new prison, a new form of suffering. The slave market was loud. White men examined black bodies. They checked teeth. They felt muscles. They assigned prices. Kwame held his son tightly. But a man came and pulled Kofi from Kwame's grip. Kwame screamed. He rebelled, but the chains were strong. They took his son away. They sold him to another man. Kwame fell to his knees, but he did not cry, because crying meant defeat, and Kwame had not yet been defeated. Kwame was sold to a large cotton plantation in Virginia. His master's name was Thomas Whitmore. He was a harsh man. His eyes were cold. He treated slaves like animals. Every morning before dawn broke, all the slaves were driven into the fields. They worked until sunset. Their backs carried whip scars. Their hands bore bleeding wounds. But Kwame still sang. While working in the fields, he hummed songs quietly. Other slaves joined in. The songs came from Africa. But within the songs were hidden messages. Which paths were safe? Which days were right for rebellion? Who could be trusted, and who could not? One evening, when Kwame returned to his cabin, he found Mama Esther, an elderly woman. Esther was the oldest slave on the plantation. Her eyes held wisdom. She approached Kwame and took his hand. She told him his songs had power, but warned him to be careful. The white men were not fools. They were listening. Kwame nodded, acknowledging her words. He told her that if he stopped singing, their souls would die. Esther smiled. She encouraged him to keep singing, but also to be prepared. Freedom does not find itself. It must be taken. Months passed. Kwame connected with more slaves on the plantation. They met secretly at night. In small cabins, they sat around fires. Kwame sang, but now the lyrics were different. They spoke of freedom. They spoke of escaping to the north. They spoke of resistance. One night, a young slave named Samuel approached Kwame. His voice was trembling as he asked about the Underground Railroad. He had heard whispers of secret routes to freedom. Samuel wanted to know if Kwame knew anything about it. Kwame looked into Samuel's eyes. Then he nodded slowly. He knew of it, but warned it was dangerous. If they were caught, they would be killed. Samuel's eyes lit up. He spoke of the possibility of being free, asking Kwame to imagine it. Kwame touched Samuel's shoulder. He explained that freedom was not just about living somewhere else. Freedom was about the soul breaking free from chains. And that began here, in their hearts. One morning, Master Thomas Whitmore summoned Kwame. Kwame came to the front of the big house. Whitmore sat on the veranda. A whip rested in his hand. Whitmore demanded to know what Kwame was singing every day. He had heard him constantly. Kwame bowed his head. He claimed they were just songs from Africa, about memories. Whitmore stood up. He declared that memories made slaves weak. He ordered Kwame to forget the past and understand that he now served here. Kwame said nothing, but inside, a fire burned. Whitmore dismissed him. But Kwame knew the truth. The white man was afraid. He feared the songs, because songs had unifying power, and unity meant rebellion. That night, Kwame sang again. But this time, the song was louder, bolder. All the slaves joined in. Voices rose through the darkness of the night. Whitmore looked out from his big house window. He clenched his fist in rage. The next morning, Kwame was whipped. Deep wounds opened across his back. But Kwame did not cry. He did not scream. He silently endured the pain. And that night, he sang again. Because Kwame knew, the song would never end. The song would be passed from generation to generation. And one day, those songs would become the songs of freedom. Years passed on the Whitmore plantation. Kwame grew older, but his spirit remained unbroken. His back was covered in scars from countless whippings. Yet every night he continued to sing. The songs evolved, becoming more complex. They contained coded instructions about escape routes, safe houses, and trustworthy allies in the Underground Railroad network. During this time, Kwame never stopped searching for information about his son Kofi. He asked every new slave who arrived at the plantation if they had seen or heard of a boy matching his description. No one had answers, but Kwame refused to lose hope. One autumn evening, a new slave arrived at the plantation. His name was Joshua, and he had been transported from a plantation in Georgia. Joshua had heard rumors of a growing network of abolitionists helping slaves escape to freedom in the North. He shared this information quietly with Kwame during their evening gathering. Kwame's heart raced at this news. He began to plan carefully. He knew that attempting escape was extremely dangerous, but the possibility of freedom and perhaps finding his son was worth the risk. He started mapping out the safest routes based on information gathered from various sources over the years. Meanwhile, Master Whitmore had become increasingly suspicious of the nightly gatherings. He instructed his overseers to watch the slaves more closely. The atmosphere on the plantation grew tense. Fear spread among the enslaved community, but Kwame reassured them through his songs. He used melodies to communicate that they must remain strong and patient. One cold December night, Kwame made his decision. He would attempt to escape. He shared his plan with only a handful of trusted individuals, including Mama Esther and Samuel. They would leave during the new moon when the darkness would provide cover. Mama Esther embraced Kwame before he left. She told him that his courage would inspire others for generations to come. She gave him a small cloth bag containing dried food and herbs for healing. Samuel clasped Kwame's hand firmly, expressing his wish to go with him. But Kwame insisted he stay behind to continue spreading the message of hope through song. On the chosen night, Kwame slipped away from his cabin. His heart pounded as he moved through the dark fields, staying low and moving carefully. Every sound made him freeze, fearing detection. The journey to freedom would be long and treacherous, requiring him to travel at night and hide during the day. He followed the North Star, just as the coded songs had taught. The first few nights were the most dangerous, as he was still close to the plantation. Hounds could easily track his scent. But Kwame had prepared for this, using techniques passed down through whispered conversations. He waded through streams to break his trail, and rubbed his feet with strong-smelling herbs. After a week of travel, Kwame reached a safe house, a small cabin belonging to a Quaker family who were part of the Underground Railroad network. They provided him with food, warm clothing, and shelter for 2 days. They also gave him information about the next safe location on his journey north. The Quaker woman, whose name was Hannah, asked Kwame about his story. He shared his painful history, speaking of his son Kofi, who had been torn from his arms years ago. Hannah listened with tears in her eyes. She promised to spread word among the Underground Railroad network to search for any information about Kofi. Kwame's journey continued for several more weeks. He traveled through Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. Each safe house brought him closer to freedom, but also reminded him of the many who remained in bondage. At each stop, he sang his songs, teaching them to the conductors and other escaped slaves he encountered. His music became part of the Underground Railroad's coded communication system. Finally, after 2 months of dangerous travel, Kwame crossed into New York, a free state. His legs nearly gave out when he realized he had made it. For the first time in over a decade, he was a free man. Tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had achieved. But his freedom felt incomplete. His son was still enslaved somewhere in the South. Kwame settled in a small black community in New York City. He found work as a laborer and joined a church where formerly enslaved people gathered. There he continued to sing his songs, now openly sharing the stories of resistance and survival. Kwame became involved in the abolitionist movement. He attended meetings organized by both black and white activists fighting to end slavery. He shared his testimony at gatherings, describing the brutal conditions on southern plantations and the power of music as a tool of resistance. His powerful voice and compelling story moved many to action. Present day, 2024. Jamal Washington sat in the back of a police car, his wrists handcuffed behind him. His head throbbed where the officer's baton had struck him. Blood trickled down from a cut above his eyebrow. He stared out the window at the flashing red and blue lights, reflecting off the surrounding buildings. He had done nothing wrong. He had simply been walking home from a recording session at his friend Marcus's studio. It was past midnight, and he was tired. When the police car pulled up beside him, the officers immediately approached with suspicion. They demanded to know what he was doing in this neighborhood. Before Jamal could fully explain, they had him on the ground. This was not Jamal's first encounter with police brutality. He had been stopped, searched, and harassed countless times throughout his 26 years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something inside him snapped. As he sat in that police car, lyrics began forming in his mind. Angry, raw, truthful lyrics about the daily indignities faced by black people in America. Jamal was a rapper, though not yet a successful one. He worked 2 jobs to support himself while pursuing his music career. His songs spoke about the struggles of growing up black in America, about poverty, about loss, about hope. But until now, his music had not reached a wide audience. At the police station, Jamal was processed and placed in a holding cell. He sat on the cold metal bench, his mind racing. Around him, other black and brown men sat in similar states of frustration and resignation. This was the reality they all shared. After 8 hours, Jamal was released without any charges. The officers never apologized. They simply opened the cell door and told him to leave. Jamal walked out into the early morning light, his body aching and his spirit bruised. But instead of going home, he headed straight back to Marcus's studio. Marcus opened the door, shocked to see Jamal's battered face. He immediately asked what happened, concern evident in his voice. Jamal brushed past him and went directly to the recording booth. He told Marcus to just start the beat. Any beat, he needed to get these words out. For the next 6 hours, Jamal recorded. The words poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. He rapped about his great-great-great-grandfather Kwame, whose story had been passed down through oral tradition in his family. He rapped about the slave ships, the plantations, the whips, and the chains. He connected those historical atrocities to modern-day police violence, mass incarceration, and systemic racism. His flow was fierce and unrelenting. His voice carried the pain of generations. Marcus sat behind the mixing board, silent tears streaming down his face as he listened. He knew they were creating something powerful, something that needed to be heard. When Jamal finally finished, he collapsed into a chair, exhausted but somehow lighter. He had channeled his pain into art, just as his ancestors had done. The songs they sang in the fields were no different from the verses he had just recorded. Both were acts of resistance. Both were declarations of humanity in the face of dehumanization. Marcus played back the recordings, The track was raw and unpolished, but its power was undeniable. They decided to title it Chains of Song in honor of Kwame's story. Without overthinking it, Marcus uploaded the track to SoundCloud and shared it on social media platforms. Within 24 hours, Chains of Song had gone viral. Thousands of people shared it, commenting on how Jamal's words captured their experiences and emotions. Major music blogs picked up the story. Radio DJs began playing it despite its explicit content and controversial message. News outlets interviewed Jamal about his assault by police and how it inspired the song. The song resonated because it was authentic. Jamal was not performing anger. He was expressing genuine pain and frustration. Listeners recognized this truth. They saw themselves in his words. They heard their own stories in his verses. Within a week, Jamal received calls from several record labels interested in signing him. Television producers wanted him to appear on their shows. Activist organizations invited him to perform at rallies and protests. His life changed overnight, but not in the ways he had imagined when he first dreamed of music success. Jamal understood that his platform came with responsibility. He was not just a rapper anymore. He had become a voice for a movement. People looked to him to articulate their collective trauma and rage. This weight was heavy, but he accepted it willingly. He thought often of his ancestor Kwame, who had used music as a tool of survival and resistance during slavery. Jamal realized he was continuing that legacy. The medium had changed from field haulers to hip-hop, but the purpose remained the same: to assert dignity, to resist oppression, and to inspire hope. As Jamal's fame grew, he made deliberate choices about how to use his platform. He refused to sign with major labels that wanted to water down his message. Instead, he remained independent, partnering with a Black-owned distribution company that shared his values. He donated a significant portion of his earnings to bail funds and organizations supporting families affected by police violence. He also started a music education program in low-income neighborhoods, teaching young people how to channel their experiences into creative expression. He wanted them to understand that their stories mattered, that their pain was valid, and that art could be both healing and revolutionary. At one of his first major concerts, Jamal stood on stage before thousands of fans. Before performing Chains of Song, he spoke about Kwame. He told the audience how his ancestor had been kidnapped from Africa, forced into slavery, and separated from his child. He explained how Kwame had used music to maintain his humanity and to organize resistance. Then Jamal began to rap. But first he sang a portion of one of Kwame's original songs in the African language that had been preserved through oral tradition in his family. The crowd fell silent, moved by the haunting melody. Then the beat dropped, and Jamal launched into his modern verses. The performance was electric. People in the audience cried, raised their fists, and sang along. In that moment, past and present merged. The songs of enslaved ancestors blended with contemporary hip-hop. The struggle continued across centuries, but so did the resistance. After the concert, a woman approached Jamal backstage. She was elderly, with kind eyes and weathered hands. She introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Chen, a historian who specialized in African American genealogy. She had attended the concert specifically to meet Jamal after hearing him speak about Kwame. Dr. Chen explained that she had been researching slave records and Underground Railroad documentation for decades. She believed she might have information about Kwame's son, Kofi. Jamal's heart nearly stopped. The family had always wondered what became of Kofi after he was sold away from his father. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chen shared her research with Jamal. Through painstaking examination of plantation records, slave auction documents, and oral histories collected from various Black families, she had traced Kofi's path after his separation from Kwame. Kofi had been purchased by a plantation owner in Alabama. He grew up enslaved, married a woman named Eliza, and had 4 children. Though he never saw his father again, Kofi preserved Kwame's songs, teaching them to his children. He told them stories of his father's courage and resilience. When the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, Kofi took the surname Washington in honor of his freedom. He worked as a sharecropper, never accumulating wealth but ensuring his children received education. His descendants spread across the South and eventually migrated north during the Great Migration. The research revealed that Kofi's lineage had continued unbroken through the generations. His great-great-great-grandson was Jamal Washington. Father and son, separated by slavery, were now connected through time by music and resistance. When Jamal learned this history, he felt a profound sense of completion. Kwame's songs had survived. His bloodline had survived. And now, generations later, his descendant was using music to fight oppression in a new era. The chain was unbroken. Jamal released a full album titled Kwame's Legacy, dedicating it to his ancestor and to all those who had suffered under slavery's brutality. Each track explored different aspects of the Black American experience, from historical trauma to contemporary struggles to visions of liberation. The album was both a commercial and critical success. But more importantly, it sparked conversations. Schools began teaching about the role of music in slave resistance. Museums created exhibits connecting historical and contemporary forms of Black artistic expression. Young activists incorporated Jamal's songs into their protests. 1 year after his assault by police, Jamal returned to the exact spot where it had occurred. This time, he brought a film crew. They recorded him performing chains of song at the location where the incident had happened. The video included documentary footage about Kwame's story, the Underground Railroad, and the ongoing fight against police brutality and systemic racism. The music video ended with footage of a protest march. Thousands of people of all races walked together, holding signs demanding justice. Jamal walked among them, no longer just an individual, but part of a collective movement. His voice rose above the crowd, leading them in a chant that echoed Kwame's ancient melodies. In the final shot, Jamal stood alone on a stage, a single spotlight illuminating him. Behind him, projected on a large screen, were images of Kwame and Kofi, artistically rendered based on historical research. 3 generations of Washington men, connected across time by blood, struggle, and song. Jamal spoke directly to the camera, his voice steady and clear. He acknowledged that the fight was not over. Racism still existed. Police brutality continued. Economic inequality persisted. But he also affirmed that resistance continued. Every song was a link in the chain connecting past struggles to present movements to future liberation. He explained that music was more than entertainment. It was documentation, education, inspiration, and mobilization. It was what his ancestor Kwame understood centuries ago when he sang in the belly of that slave ship. Songs could not break physical chains, but they could strengthen spirits, unify communities, and keep hope alive across generations. Epilogue: Connection across time. The story of Kwame and Jamal is not just one family's narrative. It represents the larger story of African Americans who have used artistic expression as a form of resistance throughout history. From spirituals sung by enslaved people to blues emerging from Jim Crow South, from jazz celebrating Black creativity to hip-hop critiquing urban oppression, music has always been central to Black survival and struggle. Kwame never lived to see freedom fully realized. He died in New York in 1867. Just 2 years after slavery's abolition. He had spent his final years working with abolitionists and searching fruitlessly for his son. Though he never found Kofi, he died knowing that his songs had helped dozens of enslaved people escape to freedom through the Underground Railroad. Kofi lived until 1901, witnessing both the promise of Reconstruction and the betrayal of Jim Crow. He taught his children and grandchildren to be proud of their heritage, to remember Kwame's courage, and to never stop fighting for dignity and justice. Each generation of Washingtons faced new forms of oppression and found new ways to resist. They participated in civil rights marches, voter registration drives, and community organizing. They became teachers, preachers, activists, and artists. They carried forward Kwame's legacy of resistance through creativity. Jamal represents the latest link in this chain. His music connects historical memory to contemporary struggle. He understands that the fight for Black liberation is ongoing, requiring each generation to take up the work in their own way. After releasing Kwame's legacy, Jamal continued to evolve as an artist and activist. He collaborated with other musicians, poets, and visual artists to create multimedia projects exploring African diaspora experiences. He spoke at universities, correctional facilities, and community centers, sharing his family's story and encouraging others to research their own histories. He also became involved in criminal justice reform efforts, using his platform to advocate for policies addressing police accountability, prison conditions, and rehabilitation programs. He understood that making music was not enough. Real change required systemic transformation, which meant engaging with political and legal systems. Years later, Jamal became a father himself. When his daughter Imani was born, he held her tiny hand and made a promise. He would teach her about Kwame. He would share the songs passed down through generations. He would ensure she understood where she came from and what her ancestors had overcome. But he would also teach her that she was not defined by trauma. Yes, she needed to know the painful history. Yes, she must understand the ongoing struggles. But she was also the product of love, resilience, creativity, and hope. She carried within her the strength of those who had survived the Middle Passage, slavery, lynching, segregation, and countless other atrocities. One evening, as Jamal rocked Imani to sleep, he sang softly. The melody was one of Kwame's original songs, preserved across 2 centuries through oral tradition. The words were in a language Jamal did not fully understand, but he knew their meaning in his heart. They spoke of home, of loss, of resistance, of hope. As he sang, Jamal thought about the unbroken chain connecting him to Kwame. Slavery had tried to destroy that connection. Racism had tried to break it, but music had preserved it. Songs passed from Kwame to Kofi, from Kofi to his children, down through the generations until they reached Jamal, who now sang them to Imani. The chain of song continued. It would continue as long as people remembered, as long as they sang, as long as they resisted. From the hull of a slave ship to a recording studio in Brooklyn, the music persisted. The struggle persisted. And so did hope.